Hey friends, welcome back. What time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? If you can, dim the lights, lie back, maybe turn on a small fan. Let your shoulders drop. Tonight we'll move slowly through very old days, quiet, detailed days. You wake up in a world without roads, only seams of grass and belts of trees, where the air smells of dust and leaves and the first birds are not in a hurry. Story 1. At the forest's edge, 4.7 million years ago, Ardipithecus and the daily balance. You wake before the air warms, tucked in the belt of trees that breaks the grassland. Light is gray and insects are slow. You listen first. Doves thrum, colobus cough, hooves move somewhere in the open. You are small beside pigs and antelopes, smaller than the cats, but you have options. Your hands close around bark, your toes spread and strong on branches. On the ground your hips stack under you. You walk upright for a time, then reach, climb, and rest. The forest is not continuous. It is a mosaic, figs and acacias stitched to thickets, then seams of grass, then another pocket of cool. Fruit is patchy. Leaves are good when tender, bitter when old. Tubers in damp soil hold water. They are hard to pull without a stick, but not impossible. No stones are shaped here, not yet, but wood and root can pry and lever. Your teeth tell the story of your day. Pits from hard grit, scratches from leafy fiber, a sweet stretch if you find figs before hornbills do. Your bones record it too, chemistry laid down year by year, tuned to see 3 foods from shade rather than bright C4 grasses. You move with others, not alone. Male canines are smaller than in earlier apes, faces are less about fighting, more about handling food. This changes the day's mood. Threat is present, but argument is quiet. Vigilance is a task shared. One watches the grass while the others feed. When the sun lifts, heat pushes you back into cover. You chew slowly, swallow often, and let stomach work while you groom burrs and pick husks from your gums. Water matters more than anything. The trees trap it, hollows after rain, sips in young stems, moisture in roots you crack with your teeth. Open water invites crocodiles and hooves. You prefer damp ground, working a shallow scrape with nails until it seeps. Your nose knows the clean smell. You crouch and drink, wipe grit on bark, and the day steadies again. Movement is deliberate. You do not cross wide grass unless a stand of trees is plainly ahead. Upright, you carry what you can. A fruit cluster, a branch to test a hollow, a sleeping infant. On thicker limbs, you step flat-footed. Your big toe still pulls sideways to hold wood. The pelvis supports balance. It is not elegant, but it works and keeps your eyes high enough to read the grass. Late in the day, the wind shifts. The grass clicks. Vultures circle a point to the south. Meat is there, but so are teeth, and the light will fail. A faint iron smell reaches you. Broken bone, torn hide, flies beginning to write circles. Running hyenas patrol there. Maturodont cats wait in the grass islands. The others look to you, then to the bright seam between shade and open ground. Do you cross now for marrow you might reach, or do you keep to the woven dark and leave your stomach empty until the figs soften? You wait at the forest margin until the air steadies. Hunger argues for the carcass, experience favors the trees. You study signs. You listen again for faint hoof clicks. Vultures are high and slow, not dropping, perhaps cats still guard the meat. A jackal barks. You turn back into the mosaic, choosing movement over chance. This is how most days resolve, not with a prize, but by keeping options. Your body remembers this terrain. The pelvis cups soft organs while you balance upright to cross patches of grass. Then the flexible midfoot and grasping big toe reclaim bark when you climb. Knuckle calluses never formed on your hands. Your wrists do not lock as true knuckle walkers do. You are not a chimp, not yet us, but something that reads both wood and ground. Teeth add the rest. Thinner enamel, modest molars, canines blunted by wear. The group is small, mothers with infants, a few subadults, 1 or 2 males that keep to the edges. Faces stay open, threats are postures more than injuries. Cohesion comes from places rather than commands. A favored fig, a sleeping fork, a seep under roots. You do not speak, but calls carry information. Soft coughs, lip smacks, a descending who when a shadow moves. Touch edits tension. Grooming is labor, and like all labor, quiets the day. Season by season you follow schedules you never wrote. When figs flush, you range shorter. When they fail, you stretch loops toward riverine fringe for herb stems and fallen pods. Dry months taste of dust and body salt. In bone and tooth, chemistries fix these routines. Carbon isotopes from forest foods, oxygen hints from water sources, tiny scratches that map the grid of each season. Later, long after your bones have fallen into silt, people will read those signatures as if they were ledgers. Threat never disappears, it is managed. You choose shade corridors to move between copses. You pause to listen before each crossing. Raptor shadows teach you to flatten, leopard smells teach you to climb, cursorial hyenas teach you that endurance is not yet yours. Even so, the upright view is a tool. You stand to see the glint of a new seep, a pale underside of figs pecked by birds, the line of termite mounds that often means moisture. Wood is the closest thing to technology. You lever tubers, pry bark, poke at hollows where bees hum and sometimes yield comb. You do not shape stone, but you notice edges. A broken cobble can split a pod and a heavy stick can test mud. The rest is memory. You remember which trees fruit in which order along the slope, which thorns catch on fur, which ground holds when sudden rain turns clay to paste. Evening approaches. Wind veers from the carcass side, the iron smell has thinned. The group settles near a sleeping tree, but hunger reopens its case. Is the risk lower now, or does darkness simply hide the teeth you avoided at noon? You wait until the last bands of heat bleed from the grass and the vultures begin to roost. The smell has thinned, flies drift lower. You choose movement before full dark. The group follows the contour of shrubs, silent in the hour when shapes blur. At the carcass patch the grass is pressed flat in arcs. Cat drag marks, paw prints in dry dust, splinters where ribs met teeth. The heavy work is done by others. What remains is what you can use, skin stiffening, long bones, hide knots clenched around joints. You do not make blades, but you understand leverage. A deadfall branch pries at a knee. A stone, not shaped but selected for weight, becomes a hammer. You strike not elegantly and shock runs up your wrists. On the third blow the shaft fractures and wet iron air returns. Marrow smells like fat and salt. You lick first, then scoop with a fingertip, then share. Infants taste it from the backs of hands. It is not much, but in bodies built for steady labor, small calories matter. Calcium, fat, a smear of protein. These are quiet victories you do not name. Signs remain everywhere. The bone bears grooves left by big teeth. Later, a human will notice that your own marks are bruises and chips, not slicing cuts. That difference will place you here, before shaped edges after the decision to borrow power from weight and angle. You retreat between tastes, climbing low branches when hyenas laugh from the opposite slope. They are busy at the hide. You are busy at the ends. Dark finishes settling. Owls begin their questions. One by one you stash fragments in forks and chew in pieces. The group elongates, each body finding a rhythm between scanning and swallowing. Water waits back at the seep. Salt dries on your lips. Finally, the sounds at the carcass stop, not because the story is over, but because there is nothing left to tell. You wipe your hands in dust and move together and unhurriedly. Sleep is a geometry. You choose a tree that forks above head height with bark that does not crumble. Infants curl at bellies, feet under ribs, fingers on fur. The wind is cooler now. A leopard passes somewhere below, your bodies become stones. Night carries information anyway, the thud of a falling fig, the far roll of hooves, a rustle that resolves into nothing. Dreams are ordinary, water, a shaded place, a branch that does not break. Morning will rearrange the same tasks. Fruit, leaves, stems, a scrape of damp earth, the reading of light on grass. You do not plan a year, you plan a next crossing. Yet in these choices something gathers. A habit of scanning horizons, a memory of sights, a preference for edges that offer both fruit and escape. Is this where a future species begins? Not with tools, but with the quiet arithmetic of risk and reward that will one day become maps, calendars, and the long patience of cities. Story 2. Stones at the water's mouth. Alduin mornings and the invention of sharp. You wake beside a river that forgets its course each season, shifting bars and braids, exposing old gravel. In the cold hour before sun warms the insects, you walk the edge where water leaves stones clean. Basalt, quartzite, vein quartz, a few nodules of chert washed down from a ridge you will never see. You weigh them with your hands. Some ring faintly, some feel dead. The good ones are dense, fine-grained, and promise a break you can predict. You were born into edges, not from leaves or teeth, but from stone struck by stone. A hammerstone in one hand, a core in the other, you set the platform low and hit with a motion your wrists remember. Conchoidal fracture answers with a dull pop and a shock in bone. A bulb swells under your blow, ripples run like water. The flake falls into sand. You do it again, turning the core to keep an angle near 60 degrees, trimming with small flakes when the platform thickens. The result is not pretty, but the edge is honest. A thin, bright line that lasts through several careful cuts. Edges change mornings. With a flake you open a hide without tearing it to fibers. With a second flake you separate tendons that once confined joints. Cut marks skim bone at shallow angles and say, later, that you were here before teeth. Hammerstones still matter. You crack limb bones on a flat anvil and watch fat rise. But flakes become the habit you carry away from water, tucked in a skin pouch or simply remembered as places. This bar, this bend, this ridge of rounded cobbles. You learn by watching. Fingers know how to hold a core so the blow lands into space. Eyes learn to read platforms, to prefer a plain surface over a crushed one, to turn rather than force. Children play at napping with chalky clasps that only crumble. Later they pick up cast-off flakes and test them on reeds. When a cut grows clean and fast, they smile without a word. Teaching is not a lecture. It is a posture, a pause, a tilted stone. Sights gather around tasks. At one bar, a litter of flakes glints where the morning sun reaches early. Across the channel, a scatter of broken bones lies beneath thorn shade, each with the same story scratched shallow. You cut first, hyenas later. In mud, heel prints stand beside small prints, a rhythm of approach, strike, and step. Raw material moves too. A favored core from upriver sits here now, its last scars fresh. Someone carried it a morning's walk for reasons that are both obvious and still private. By noon, the gravel is hot. You tuck 3 good flakes, drink where the current curls, and look to the terrace where vultures describe a loose spiral. Edges have broadened your options, but options are invitations. Which will you answer today? The water's bar for more stone, or that pale distance where bone waits with its silent questions? You choose the terrace because meat changes how far you can walk tomorrow. The vulture's spiral loosens as you approach the thorn shade. You test the wind. The carcass is a zebra foal, cat bitten at the haunch, ribs raked and opened. Tooth scores stripe the pelvis, big cuts are high. You read this as you read stone. The cats took first, then moved on. You still have something. You set a flake on the hide and seam along the grain, not across it. Thin edges bite. The sound is a quiet tearing. You open the forelimb and find the white bands where tendons anchor. Cut marks go shallow there, notches neat and short, a record that you separated joints rather than batter them. You pass pieces to others who wait, eyes in the grass, ears on the wind. The hammerstone comes next, a round basalt with pitted faces from many mornings. On a flat anvil you place the radius, then strike until the shaft blooms a crescent notch and marrow glistens at the split. Edges do more than feed. A flake skims a reed to make a straw so your lips avoid mud. Another scrapes bark for fibers you twist into a loop to hold a pouch. At the river, you shave a stick to probe for yams, working the soil until a tuber rises like a damp stone. When you lack stone, you walk for it. A morning can become a chain of bends to bring one good core back to a place where meat often lands. Cores become stories you tell with your feet. Napping itself makes places. On a low bench near the ford, refitting pieces still know each other. If someone gathers them, the core can be made again in mind. Debris fields lie like maps. Large flakes where you sat, small trimming shatter where you fixed a bad platform, crushed bulbs where you hit too hard. Children learn these patterns by play. Elders mark them with nothing but patience. You are not alone on the carcass. Hyenas bubble laugh from behind the brush. They test the circle, then settle to wait. Lions do not return, but the smell of them keeps you taut. Meat is not simply energy, it is risk turned into time. You cut clean, you carry fast, and you leave a message scratched into bone by accident, that you were here during the window between cat and scavenger. Evening pushes light sideways. The river bar glows. You could stay and finish, but the air cools and the hyenas grow bold. The ford is shallow now, but darkness folds sound in ways. A last blow opens the radius, and you pocket 2 bright flakes from the sand. Do you turn back to the ford now, carrying grease on your hands and knowledge in your fingers, or try for one more cut in a circle that is closing? You step back from the carcass when the first hyena breaks the brush. Its head swings, reading scent like handwriting. You have time for one more decision. The river is a thin band of brightness through thorn. The ford lies 2 bends north where the gravel hums underwater. You lift the 4-limb bundle by the hock, tuck 2 flakes against your wrist, and move at a casual walk, hard to chase. Others mirror you without talk. Distance is its own tool. At the bar, the anvil waits as if placed for you, a flat cobble that has absorbed hundreds of small concussions. You set bone to stone, strike along the old notch, and listen for the change in pitch that says the shaft is ready to open. It gives on the 4th blow. Marrow slumps, warm and clean. You share it in turns, not because of a rule, but because the morning becomes longer when no one is empty. The hide will dry later as a wrapper. Sinew will be teased and twisted while stories are told. Work leaves a pattern. If someone returned tomorrow, they would see it. Flake scars on cores, bipolar shatter where a small nodule was split on the anvil, hammerstones pitted like old fruit. On bones, your cut marks skim and cluster at joints. On long shafts, percussion cones radiate from impact points. Hyena scores cross them later, deeper and wilder. In the mud nearby, prints overlap. Small, large, the occasional knuckled drag of a child still learning balance with a load. A geologist might call this in. When the sun climbs, heat presses decisions flat. You cache 2 cores under a root where the flood rarely reaches. You rinse flakes and set them on a slab to dry, edges gleaming like thin water. Children nap, then wake to scrape reeds, imitating the angle of your wrist. Their flakes are thick and dull. They still cut grass. Skill accumulates this way, intolerances felt through skin and tendon. No names are given to techniques, but preferences harden. Basalt for hammers, quartzite for cores, the gravel be. By late day, the river cools again. You carry meat to a terrace above the floodline. Smoke is not yours yet. Fire comes and goes with lightning and luck, a visitor you court but do not command. So you dry strips in wind and shade, guard them with presence, and sleep in shifts while night hunters patrol the reed beds. An owl drops through darkness and lifts with something small. Upriver, thunder piles on the horizon and fails. In the morning, this place will tell your story wordless. For those who listen closely, the order of tasks, the sequence of stone and flesh, the habit of returning to ground. A bright edge became a way of arranging days, and the river kept your curriculum in gravel and bone. Is this how technology always starts, not with a shout, but with repeated mornings that press a quiet pattern into the land itself? Story 3, Following Fire, Early Homo and the Long Memory of Embers. You smell the burn before you see it, a tang of resin and damp ash hanging low over the slope. Lightning ran this ridge 2 nights ago, licking dead grass and thorn, laying a black band across the hillside. You move along the cooled edge at morning, barefoot in soot, looking for the dull red glow that means transportable heat. Fire is not yours, not yet, but you have learned to travel with it. You kneel beside a stump where heartwood smolders under a skin of gray. With a peeled stick, you tease out a coal, set it into a cup of punky wood, and bury both in dry dung. Breath turns it brighter, then a twist of grass dims it to a secret. Carried this way, the ember survives wind and crossings. You walk with it as a quiet companion, an hour or 2 of stored dawn. Burned ground changes food. Along the margin, you lift warm tubers with a pointed stick and find their fibers loosened by heat. Beetles, slightly crisp, collect at the ash line. Seeds lie exposed, their husks fragile. A lizard stunned by smoke gives you small meat. Nothing here is a feast, everything is easier. On the fresher edge, grazers nose the new green and you watch from downwind. Predators come too, but ash dulls scent and smoke irritates eyes. You do not make fires from nothing, but you remake them from coals. In a lee behind a fallen trunk, you scrape a shallow hollow and pour the ember into shaved bark. You feed it with slivers until pale flames show. The light is small and quiet. You squat, palms extended, and hold sticks in hottest blue to harden their tips. When you test a point on your thumb, it slides less. Flame-tempered wood behaves like a new material. Tempered tips dig tubers faster and hold shape when prying joints or bark. Sparks jump. You shelter them with your hand. At night, heat means decisions. In open country, a microhearth draws insects, then lizards, then owls. Each guest writes presence into the dark. You crowd coals into ash to smother brightness and keep warmth. Smoke drifts into skin folds. It covers you like a thin skin other animals don't recognize. Sleep is longer, shallower, punctuated by the hiss of seeds, the pop of sap. Ash leaves durable gossip. Bones laid near fire show colors, brown, then black, then calcined white when heat runs through. Sediments redden, clay recrystallizes, plant silica explodes into bright flakes that catch dawn. Long after you move away, the floor keeps your hours, trampling marks, splinters where you fed sticks, singe on probe tips. Morning asks practical questions. The ember you carried is small now, its heat a private thing cupped in ash. If you range for water, it might die. If you stay to build it, predators may read the column. Do you gamble on a new coal ahead or learn to guard this one like a moving heart? You choose to keep the ember. You learn its appetite. Resin-rich twigs wake it quickly. Punky heartwood carries it far. Dung hushes it to a slow red that survives crossings and wind. You plan your path by fuel as if the land were a chain of pantries. Acacia pods here, dry palm fronds there, a fallen stump remembered from last season. The ember becomes a map you carry. Hearths form where wind is kind. You scrape a shallow basin with a stick. Ring it with 3 stones only when you can spare them. Stone cracks in heat and leaves sharp pot lid spalls that will speak later to people who read floors. You feed thick wood to make coals, not flames, because coals behave. You pull them forward with a green stick to make a working edge and bank the rest in ash. At night you cap a heart of coals with dung. In morning you lift the lid and the ember breathes. Food changes in small, repeatable ways. Tubers softened in ash lose their sting and cut cleaner. Seeds crack and shed husk with a sigh. Grubs crisp politely. A strip of meat warmed near coals gives its fat without smelling of rot. Damp grass wrapped around shellfish hisses at the edge until steam carries salt into the air. You do not cook as a rule. You warm and wilt. You smoke and soften. It is enough to save teeth, time, and stomach. Hours not spent chewing become hours spent watching. Mending, teaching risks the angle of a flake or the pace of a fire. Fire writes on places. Cave floors redden where heat lingers. Clay grains change. Ash lenses form in thin gray layers. Burned bone models from brown to black to chalk when heat runs through it. Charred nut shells and water plant seeds settle beside fish spines in shallow hearth basins near rivers. On open terraces, trampling loosens sediments into a soft, living floor with tiny charcoal flecks caught in the surface. If you leave and return, you can find your spot again by smell and color. Predators hesitate at smoke. Eyes shine and then turn. Insects avoid your faces for a time. You sleep a little deeper, though never full. A microhearth is also a beacon, so you trim its light with ash, lift it behind a log, shield it with your body. Children are taught by routine. Gather dry tips, lay thin over thick, do not feed the heart too much at once, keep a branch burning elsewhere as insurance. Elder bodies become repositories of methods. How to coax life from a sullen coal after rain. How to split damp wood to find a dry nerve. How to judge whether this thorn will spark or only smoke. Seasons test the craft. In the wet, embers drown, wood swells, and smoke stings. In the dry, grass leaps, and a carelessly placed coal can convert your map into danger. You bank carefully, you move slowly, and you ask the same plain question each dusk. Do we keep the ember breathing, or risk the dark in hope of finding another fire tomorrow? You choose the hard lesson. Keep the ember alive through a full cycle of weather and walking. Dryness becomes a practice rather than a place. You split damp wood to free a dry vein, shave slivers from the heart of branches that look useless from the outside, and pocket a pinch of dung scraped from a crust. The ember rides in ash cupped in bark. When wind rises, you close the heat and carry it like an egg. When air is still, you spread coals thin and rake them forward for work. Fire rearranges time. Mornings begin with warmed roots and softened seeds. Chewing shortens, stomachs ache less, hours open. A thorn pulled from a foot hisses clean over heat and the day continues. Sleep gathers closer to a dim center. Elders edge in and sigh as joints loosen. Infants wake less. Predators still pass, reading your scent, but hesitation enters them. A lifted branch tipped with coal becomes a temporary border you could not draw in darkness before flame. Work reorganizes around fuel. You no longer gather every stick, only straight, dry, dense wood that splits predictably. Trees sort themselves by service in your memory. Acacia for fast flame, mopping for long coals, palm husk for waking a sullen heart. Stones near the hearth learn to crack. You move those that burst and leave those that hold. Smoke behaves under cliffs and in gullies, so you choose lee pockets where wind peels scent away. The camp grows legible. Trampled earth near the glow, sleeping hollows set back, a midden of shells and gnawed bone downwind. The ember invites experiments you do not name. Spear tips hardened above coals pry joints without folding. A bent stick warmed and cooled keeps its curve. Shellfish tossed at the edge click and open, yielding meat without stone. Damp leaves steamed over embers quiet stings and turn bitter plants tolerable. Each trick is small. Together they make distance less costly. A day's range lengthens by an hour, then more. You can choose a farther spring and still return under stars. Memory thickens into method. You carry not only edges and embers but the sequence that links them. Where to place camp in wind, how far smoke travels over water, which hollows keep coals until morning, which child can tend the insurance brand. Gesture becomes teaching. A tightened mouth at a careless spark. A hand flattening to show banquet, a finger circling meaning, pull coals forward. Shared timing hardens into a language of tasks. Seasons turn. Rains drown your ember twice. You relearn resignation, then solve it. Split wet wood to find a dry nerve, keep grass dry inside skins, raise fire on a raft of sticks. Continuity returns. In bone, calories from softened foods write different days. In soil, reddened floors and charcoal breaths become a charter others can read. Perhaps this is civilization's quiet beginning. A managed ember carried forward, fragile and stubborn, asking if we can keep warmth without letting the grass burn. Story 4, The Long Walk to Water, Springs, Salt, and the Pleistocene Commute. You start before heat has a voice. Stars are still up, and thorn silhouettes right themselves against a pale rim in the east. Nights in the Pleistocene are generous, days are not. Water decides the route, the pace, and the arguments. The group rises without talking. Feet know which dust holds and which crust breaks. You begin the long walk toward places that remember rain better than the open plain does. Water is not one thing. There is river water, brown and busy with teeth. There are pans, shallow dishes that hold last month's storm for a week and then only the smell of it. There are seeps where groundwater squeezes up along fractured rock, slick with algae and mosquito ghosts. And there are fault-borne springs where the land moves enough to pump its own coolness. You prefer seeps and springs, small, shaded, hard to monopolize, legible by their edges. Fresh tracks, old mud, a slip where a hoof lost trust. Salt belongs to the commute. A low white crust rims a dry basin. Zebra chew the edge and lick the ground. Bones taste faintly of it, and so do certain ashes. Sweat writes salt out of you faster than fruit brings it back. You stop at licks only when wind is steady, because big animals stand there with heads down and cats love that posture. Sometimes you touch a damp flake to your tongue, testing for brine, a habit that teaches thirst more than sharpness. Carrying water is a future luxury. Today you carry roots. Containers exist as possibilities, rinds, skins, shells, but they are awkward, rare, and leaky. Instead, you pace the land like a clock. From the sleeping copse to the seep is an hour, to the fault spring too, to the river only when clouds pile over the plateau and crocodiles go quiet. You memorize shade islands, termite mounds that mean firmer ground, the thin green of sedge that betrays damp clay. Children learn this map by following, elders by recall and comparison, adding small corrections each year. Your body helps. Long limbs shed heat, hair thins on the trunk, sweat runs early. You time crossing so sun angles are kind. You rest where a low drift of air threads a notch, chest open, mouth closed. Salt dries at the corner of the eye. At the seep you test the crust with a stick. You lie prone and drink through a reed so the surface stays calm. The first mouthful tastes of grass. The second tastes of stone. Rivers are parliaments where everyone speaks at once. Hippos, crocodiles, cats, people, hooves. You approach them like a problem. On riffles, sound hides your steps. In backwaters, scent announces you before the wind does. Some seasons the river breaks into a maze and leaves bright fish stranded in grass. Other seasons it shrinks to a spine of warm stones, and carrion smell becomes a signpost. You read and pass. By midday the ground flashes. From afar the pans look full, mirage stacked on mirage, the way promises stack in a dry year. Your tongue grows heavy. Vultures drift. Do you shorten the day by risking the open salt pan, or lengthen it by detouring to the shaded spring that might already be only a memory? You lengthen the walk. The pan is a glittering lie. The spring at the fault might be thin, but shade is a virtue of its own. You thread thorn corridors where wind moves, place feet on old spoor. Heat presses like a hand. Today the group stretches into a quiet line, each person fixing on the next patch of shadow like a promise. Navigation is memory layered with experiments. An old elephant dig still holds dampness. You probe it with a stick. A termite mound has collapsed since the last rains. That tells you groundwater touched surface there. You follow the green seam of sedge into a fold where rock shoulders the plain. The spring is not a pool today. It is a weep. You clear a palm-sized bowl with your fingers, line it, and wait for clarity to gather. The first trickle tastes of stone and leaf. You drink through a reed so the surface stays calm, then move aside for the next mouth. Salt lives in little habits. You crush dry leaves of salty soda in your palm and lick the dust. You rub ash from particular shrubs onto meat to keep it longer and to bring minerals back. You do not count milligrams. You measure cramps that fade and steady your hearts. Children learn the taste of false licks, borax bitterness, gypsum chalk, by supervised mistakes. Elders remember the year a pan killed 3 zebras and the lion that followed them into stillness. Water makes tools of ordinary things. A reed becomes a straw, a folded leaf a gutter, a hollow bone a short-lived canteen closed with grass and clay. You stage sips rather than gulps. You wet the tongue, then the throat, then the belly. Shade doubles each swallow's value, so you build it with cloaks with branches. Rest becomes a technology, lying on your side on the earth, feet raised on a root, mouth closed except for the smallest breaths. Roots are negotiated with other thirsty lives. You read hippo paths, wide, trodden, dangerous, and choose parallel lines in the scrub. You skirt giraffe congregations. When wind shifts, you circle upwind of the seep so your smell rides away. A leopard's rasp quivers from a gully. You hold still and let hot air pass your ears until the sound unwinds. Sometimes the river must be risked. A braided reach offers riffles and islands. You test each channel with your stick, probing for sudden depth, scanning for the slide of scales. You cross in sequence, 2-step, 2-watch, bundles high, then the watchers follow. On the far bank, mud holds the day's census. Fresh crocodile belly drags, pig cloven prints, your own long toes. Afternoon loosens heat. The spring has given what it can. Ahead, a basalt ridge casts a shadow wide enough to sleep in, but the shortest line there clips a hippo path bright with wet. Do you chance the quick route and its noise, or take the longer arc through thorns where eyes may be fewer but footing fails? You take the longer arc through thorns, because noise on a hippo road is an invitation you cannot withdraw. The corridor is narrow, Branches score your shins and whisper against the bundles. Feet place themselves on patches of gray earth where roots hold. Every few paces you stop, not to rest, but to listen for the wet churn of a mouth opening in mud. Breath is a small, disciplined thing. At a break-in scrub you scout alone, belly low, scanning for the pale gouge of fresh tusk and the flattened gleam of recent wallow. You find only yesterday's prints. The group threads after you, each person stepping where you point. A child trips. You taste the wind in lifted dust before helping them up. Small dramas pass without sound. Pace returns. The basalt ridge gives shade at last. Heat slacks. You scrape a shallow trench to trap any breeze, then lay cloaks so skin touches cool rock. Water is staged, not spent. A reed becomes a ration, 3 draws, then pass. Salt is replaced with a pinch of ash rubbed on a strip of meat and a lick from a leaf brown with Suda dust. Feet are open to the air, blisters drained with a thorn, soles rubbed with fat and wrapped in softened bark. Tools sleep on stone, voices stay low. Evening changes the river's voice. You send 2 ahead to read the ford while light still holds. They squat at the riffle, tracing the surface with sticks until a buried stone reveals a safer line. Crossing is choreography. Bundles high, bodies angled upstream, one at a time through the quick tongue of water, watchers on stones. Crocodiles prefer deep, silent reaches. You cross where noise is your ally. On the far bank you check for seep. There is none. The day ends as many end, not with a pool but with practice. You drink what remains, wet mouths, and bank the ember under ash. Night insects rise. Stars ladder the sky into distances you know by shoulder and hip. Sleep is forward-leaning. Tomorrow's route rides with you under the ribs. The commute is older than memory and leaves fossils that are not bones. Micro-polished reeds, saltier ash, thin pathways puckered through grass from repeated feet. Later people will find these routes again because they make sense. Pastoral tracks, then caravan ways, then graded roads that still arc toward springs and skirt salt. Your body, tuned by many such days, becomes a record too. Long limbs, chests, sweat systems write salt on skin and teach hands to bring it back. In cities, the walk to water will become a tap and a timed bill, but the arithmetic survives. Plan shade, stage sips, share loads, favor the ford that speaks. When the heat piles now, we close our mouths and shorten our strides without thinking. Do our modern commutes carry the same geometry? An old route in new pavement, still asking how far to go for what keeps a day alive. Story 5. Fat, marrow, and honey. The quiet economics of early calories. You wake to a slow hunger, not the sharp edge of absence but the steady arithmetic of bodies that walk far. Fruit is scattered. Lean meat fills the belly but drains the day because protein alone does not carry you. What you need is condensed light, fat, sugar, the energies that stretch a morning into distance. The plain offers them in pockets if you know where to listen. Bones speak first. A zebra thigh left by cats looks empty until you read the seam where shaft meets joint. You set the bone on a stone and strike along a line you have practiced. Shock jumps, a crack flowers, and the shaft opens to a pale column that shines even in shade. Marrow is quiet food. No chewing time, little smell, dense and kind to the gut. Infants lick it from a thumb. Elders swallow it with relief. Skulls ask for different patience. You pry the nose, notch the orbit, lift the lid, and spoon the soft brain. Brains are fat too, silky and quick to spoil. Honey is the other language of plenty. Bees hide sweetness in walls and hollow trees. Their guardianship is loud. You read bee roads by light, lines that from flowers to trunks, and you follow them in late morning when the air is busy. Smoke is your argument. A smoldering wad of punky wood, a bundle of dry leaves, a handful of dung. Each pushes the hive toward tolerance. Stings still come, hot. You keep your eyes half closed and work quickly. Comb lowers like a golden map, brood dark and honey pale. You pass wax and larvae to the bird that watched you climb. You keep the sweetness. What you gather is not random. It is a budget. Fat saves water because it yields it when burned. Sugar spares muscle by feeding quick fires. The walk to water shortens if breakfast included marrow. A child's steps lengthen on a smear of honey. Even your decisions about risk bend toward these payoffs. A carcass with thin flesh still deserves a visit if the bones are long. A hive in a high tree may be worth the climb if the dry season has taught your belly to count. Birds help. A small brown honey guide chatters from a branch, flits ahead, waits, then calls again. You answer with sounds elders taught you. The bird leads you to a hive you might have missed, wanting wax and brood and trusting you for scraps. Other partners exist too: fire, wind, time. But this one asks least and gives often. Later people will find beeswax traces on containers, cut marks where brains were taken, and ragged fractures on long bones that closely match your blows. They will draw graphs and say energy density drove histories. You already know this as a feeling in your legs and a quiet in your head. But when the hives thin and carcasses are clean, what calendar do you follow, and how do you hedge the hunger between the bright days? You plan for calories the way others plan for shade. Seasons decide the menu. After rains, flowers pull bees out of hollows and honey roads thicken. In the lean months, bone is surer. You cache long bones in thorn forks where hyenas hesitate, trusting dryness to keep scent low. When you return, you open them fast, before flies make confetti of the day. Fat hides in plain sight. A rib eye may look generous, but it asks teeth and time. The real hoard sits inside shafts, skulls, and backs of large animals late in the rains. You learn to read animals for stores. Ribs smooth and filled mean good marrow. Sharp ribs mean a bad season. You favor hind limbs, choose heads when neck vertebrae show tooth scoring, and ignore gnawed shafts that waste blows. The arithmetic is quiet. How many strikes per swallow? How many minutes per mouthful, sweetness or fat? Plants pay too when you choose them for density. Starchy corms roast easier at a fire's skirt than raw. Nuts crack best where roots hold anvils steady. In dry savannas, stone-hard seeds yield to a patient rhythm. Place, strike, rotate, strike. Oil lingers in fingers afterward. You smear it on dry meat, saving sunlight. Fruit seasons offer surpluses that look obvious but travel badly. You split skins, lay slices on bark in wind, and build shade so heat works without spoiling. Without pots, you rely. Honey remains the cleanest surplus if you can reach it. You walk behind the small brown bird, offer calls it recognizes, and smoke the hive to politeness. Comb divides by use. Brood for the bird, honey for you, wax chewed because it tastes of flowers after the sugar is gone. Sometimes you store comb high, trusting rock to slow ants. Sometimes you eat all you dare because sweetness draws attention. Stings become part of ledger, accepted, counted, forgotten by end of day. Sharing is insurance. A marrow day for one camp balances a honey day for another. You bring bundles to neighbors and receive later, not charity but smoothing of luck. Children learn this by watching the rhythm of hands. Elders keep calendars no one sees. When flowers break, when termites fly, when fat sits under hides. Your map grows temporal as well as spatial. Failure clarifies. When bones are empty and hives silent, you walk farther for shellfish, grubs, or birds stunned by heat. You soften bitter roots in ash, spit out fibers, keep the quiet middle. You chew leather to ease thoughts of food. Fat also insulates you from cold and long night winds quietly. Nights grow longer and decisions tight. Chase rumor of a carcass or sleep and trust tomorrow's flowers. Energy is distance in disguise. Each surplus gives you options. A longer walk to a safer spring, an extra hour to watch the river rather than gamble. But when rain patterns shift and blossoms fail twice, which part of the budget breaks first? The body, the alliances, or the map you thought was reliable? You follow a rumor of sweetness into rock country, where fig trees clutch ledges and bees favor dry cracks. The honey guide appears, tail flicking, voice like a wetted reed. You answer, then coax calm smoke from punky wood and leaves, dampened so the plume crawls. Stings still find wrists and the soft skin beside the nose. You blink and take what you can without breaking the hive. Back on the terrace, the group divides the labor that turns luck into distance. Someone lays comb on warm stone to bleed. Someone else crushes oily nuts. Strips of lean meat stiffen at the ember's edge. A brush of honey across the fibers keeps flies off and seals salt inside. You wrap pieces in hide and tie them with sinew. It is not storage like pottery will be, but it buys miles and mourning. Waxed wrappings resist ants for a while, and shade keeps the bundles from weeping in heat. Bones become small banks. Where thorn slows hyenas, you cache a femur in a fork 3 body lengths high, smearing bark with ash to confuse noses. Days later you return and open it cleanly, wasting little. Repetition sharpens judgment. The angle that opens a shaft without shattering it. The notch that persuades a skull. The moment when effort stops paying and you leave the rest to night teeth. Wax is a minor wealth. You chew it after the sweetness, then warm it near coals until it softens. A thumbful rubbed along a leaf seam tightens a brief gutter. A bit on a reed stiffens the tip against mud. Mostly, wax rides as breath and memory, the taste of flowers kept for later when the plain tastes of dust. The economics are not written, but they govern. You trade stings for sugar, bone noise for fat, time at water for time and shade. A good honey day makes a long walk day possible. A poor one sends you to shell beds or termite flights. Elders keep a ledger in stories. Blossoms failed twice. Marrow carried 3 camps to the rains. A child followed the honey guide too far and came back haloed in gold. Evidence accumulates in the ground. Long bones at campsites break into neat wedges from deliberate blows. Cut marks skim joints where tendons anchor. Hearths trap tiny beads of rendered fat that darken soil. Honey leaves little trace in deep time, but paths to cliff hives wear smooth, and the small bird's nearness to smoke says the pact is old. Later, people will argue dates. The land answers with patterns that repeat. By evening the bundles are ready. Feet are greased, mouths quiet, eyes turned toward the next seam of shade. You rise into the long twilight with surplus tucked beneath your ribs, a quiet insurance against luck. Is this the first budget, calories turned into choices, risk converted into range, that leads by many small ledgers to granaries, markets, and today's bright aisles where sweetness and fat wait everywhere, while hunger in other shapes still walks just behind? Story 6, Sleeping Without Walls, Night Watch in the First Camps. You choose camp before darkness chooses you. The place is ordinary, a low shoulder of ground with thorn at the back, a view across grass stitched with termite mounds, and a notch that leaks a steady wind. Walls do not exist. Design is a matter of angles. You keep distance from water so crocodiles and hippos pass elsewhere. You avoid hollow ground where cold and insects collect. You favor a slight tilt so rain will run, not pool beneath ribs. The plan repeats across seasons. Fire sits where sparks will not climb dry brush. An ember banked in ash is your center, dim and low. Sleeping hollows notch outward from it like petals. Feet tend toward heat, heads toward brush. Infants and elders occupy the innermost arc. Bundles become boundaries. Spears and digging sticks lie within reach. Tips harden over coals. A ring of thorn dragged from acacia branches discourages curious hyenas without promising safety you cannot pay. Bedding is a technology older than pots. You lay grass over twig lattices to lift bodies from damp earth. Add leaves that smell bitter, crush aromatic stems that make ticks and fleas retreat. Ash dusted under mats curbs crawling pests. On rock, you shake mats into a corner and rake hearth waste into yesterday's ash lens. Later, people will read these habits in layers, trampled patches with micro-charcoal, grass phytolith sheets, and thin bands of insecticidal leaves in ash. Night watch is not a rank, it is a rhythm. You divide time by coals, the size of the heart at dusk, the ring at midnight, the fist at pre-dawn. Moonlit nights relax the edges, new moon nights tighten them. Watchers sit with backs to brush, eyes outward, a brand hidden in ash to wake light without flare. Their work is mostly listening, for the soft pop of sap, for hoof thuds crossing termite crust, for leopard's rasp, for hyena's rising giggle that often signals only patience. Rules accumulate, no scraps near sleep. Latrine downwind beyond the thorn drag. Water skins hung not set, ants red ground like a map. Children learn to step around coals, not across them. Everyone learns the cough for freeze, the click for come, the hand that lowers panic. Stories belong to early dark, wrapping the hour in recognizability. How wind turns off the ridge where fire hides in rain, why owls ask the same questions. Evidence of these nights is modest and stubborn. Hearthstones crack into pot lids, bones near the fire redden, sleeping hollows polish the floor. Burned seeds mark someone testing bitterness against heat. Thorn tips char where the barrier was refreshed. Footprints press deeper on paths between ember and edge. A spare ember smolders in a clayless cup of bark and dung, insurance against rain, wind, and dreams failing. You sleep without walls and still produce architecture, a plan of heat, scent, and attention. What protects you more, the number of bodies within arm's reach, or the single pair of ears that refuses sleep when darkness leans in? You settle the pattern into bodies. Watch rotates without ceremony. The first sitter is whoever ate least at dusk, the second is the one who woke early, the third is the elder who wakes when wind shifts. Each knows the posture, knees drawn, spine stacked, brand buried in ash to breathe when lifted. You feed only coals, flames climb and advertise. Heat is for joints, not for boasting. Edges are tuned. Thorn dragged into a low fence is not a wall, but it forces a change in approach that ears can read. Branches set on hair triggers become telltales. When a hyena noses through, the brittle snap travels like a whispered warning. Pebbles in a shallow bowl serve the same duty. A foot shifts them and sound pours out. You lay these small alarms where paths prefer to flow. Insects teach restraint. Smoke is rationed, enough to bend mosquitoes, not enough to pull cats. You dust sleeping hollows with ash, rub bitter leaves on ankles and wrists, and shake mats at the perimeter so fleas fall where lizards hunt. Scraps are fed to coals or carried beyond the ring. Grease is wiped with grass and burned. The camp's smell becomes deliberate. Wood, ash, human salt. Simple, readable, uninteresting to thieves who prefer rot. Nights are for repair. You scrape half smooth with flakes dulled by the day, twist sinew under your knee to dry straight, pick thorns from soles and warm bent sticks to persuade them true. Children learn quiet play at the rim of light, tracing constellations with a twig. Moon cycles become a calendar of vigilance. Bright nights invite longer forays, dark ones pull the circle tight. Stars become landmarks. Shelter evolves by weather rather than ambition. When wind carries grit, you lean a lattice of poles against thorn to make a low windbreak and weight it with stones. In rain, you raise mats on forked sticks so bodies stay above seep. Caves offer roof and trap voices. They also hold leopard histories in gouged walls. You learn their stories by smell and choose overhangs with multiple exits and a view that denies surprise. Reuse leaves legible floors. Each return thickens the ash lens, polishes pathways between hearth and margin, and scatters the same suite of seeds and bones. Sedge, nuts, small fish, long bone shards bruised by anvils. Microscopic charcoal threads the dirt where infants crawled. The place remembers you even when seasons forbid the stop. Conflicts are managed like sparks with banking and space. A sharp word is walked off beyond the thorn, then brought back as silence. Sharing governs security. A hungry watcher blinks. So the evening ration is even, and the second watch receives an extra swallow of warm water salted with ash. Past midnight the air cools and sound carries far. A leopard's sawed breath rasps from the dark gully, closer than comfort. Do you wake the ring and move the ember now, or hold your geometry and trust that the thorn and your ears are enough? You hold your geometry. The ember stays banked under ash. Watchers stay low, brands cupped. The leopard's rasp moves, stops, moves again. It is counting your scent, the wind slope, the silhouettes. You let time be your fence. Thorn spars complain. The brittle trip branch waits to report. Silence here is the planned sound of nothing. When the rasp comes closer, you lift the brand and show only the ember's eye. It is not threat, only information. Heat lives here, eyes are open. The cough passes around the ring like a seam being stitched, once to freeze, twice to gather. No one stands, standing looks like challenge. Instead, you thicken together by hands' breadths. Feet tuck under, infants pulled inward, tools nudged aside. A watcher reaches to the alarm bowl and lets two pebbles kiss. The sound carries like a small river over stone. Predators prefer edges they can solve. You complicate the edge. A curtain of dry grass hung earlier now shifts and rubs to a cat that looks like bodies beyond bodies. The leopard decides it has learned enough and unwinds into the gully. You boast nothing aloud. Pulse slows to camp tempo. Minutes lengthen back into hours. Repair resumes, quiet stitching of a sling, a thorn eased from a heel, a spear half warmed and straightened over coals. Someone turns the ember, feeding it a thin stick that hisses once and disappears. The children sleep again. The second watcher marks time by Orion's climb and the changing odor of the fire as heartwood becomes ash. Dawn develops as a gradient. Birds form a low chorus. Dew silvers the thorn fence like a shallow net on scrub. You rake open the ember and it exhales, a red that feels older than plans. Breakfast is modest. Roots warmed until breathy, a strip of meat glossed with yesterday's fat, a reed of water saved from the seep. Camp disassembles as quietly as it slept. Mats shaken outward, ash scattered thin, refuse carried beyond the ring. The morning smells of ash, grass, and cooled stone and patient feet. What remains is a geometry pressed into soil. A faint crescent of bedding points toward the ember, a darker patch where hands worked, a path burnished by many short errands. Archaeology will later name these instructions. Micromorphology will slice soil and find ash lenses. Phytolith sheets will map bedding. Pot-lid spalls will date the hearth's moods. Trampled floors will read like fingerprints of nights. Your choices, made to keep teeth at distance and insects nearer the fire than the vein, will teach strangers how you slept without walls yet lived within plans. Cities will inherit this vigilance. Night shifts, door chains, smoke alarms, courtyards that remember how wind moves, neighborhoods where eyes speak across dark. The skill was never merely to build, but to listen while resting. As we lock doors, draw curtains, and set small lights to pulse when we sleep, are we still repeating your quiet architecture? Trust distributed around a dim center, against a darkness that always leans a little closer. Story 7, Skins, Sinew, and Shade. How clothing began to happen. You begin with heat rather than cold. The plain is a white mirror, insects score the air, and the sun writes into your skin. Shade is a material here, as is wind. Before walls or roofs, you move with your own patch of weather, bundles that soften light, wraps that deny teeth grip, covers that turn sweat into strategy. Hides are the first candidates because animals grow shelter. A fresh skin is heavy and stubborn. You rake it over a branch and push fat away with a dulled flake. The edge that fails at meat excels at scraping. You rub the inner side with ash and brain, work it with stone until fibers loosen and water leaves. Smoke cures patience into it. This is not tailoring, it is persuasion. The hide becomes less like an animal and more like a portable patch of shade. Sinew follows when meat is finished. Tendons dry into cords with memory. You split them with your thumbnail, chew to soften, and twist under your knee into threads that contract as they cure. Sinew pulls two edges together without knots, swelling tight when damp then shrinking under sun. Bone awls, polished by hands, pierce neat holes along a seam. Later, needles with eyes will come, but an awl and thread are enough for cloaks and ties. Plant fibers arrive where trees shed skin generously. You peel inner bark in ribbons, soak it, and beat it against a log until it turns to felted sheets, the ancestor of bark cloth. Elsewhere, grasses and palm strips are twined into cords. Cord becomes net. Net becomes a mantle that breaks sunlight and catches breeze. None of this looks like modern clothing. It is surface management. Cover shoulders, spare the crown with a coiled cap, thicken soles with plated sandals on stony ground. Pigment is part of the kit. Red ochre rubbed into skin mixes with fat and ash to make a thin film that slows sun and insects and smells of smoke. Grease sheds water and eases friction where straps ride. Feathers, shells, and beads appear at seams, not as vanity alone but as memory aids and social flags. Who slept where, who carried the ember, who knows the route to salt. Evidence for these habits survives by accident. All's polished to an oily gloss. scraper edges with hide working wear, hearths where skins hung in smoke. In colder latitudes, bone needles with eyes speak of stitched seams, lined hoods, and sleeves. Microscopic lice will one day tell a timeline, clothing lice part company with head lice when wrappers become common. The date hides inside their bodies more reliably than in our floors. Clothing begins as moving architecture, small roofs carried on shoulders, ropes of memory crossing skin. It is not a leap but the slow knitting of materials into comfort and time. As the wind hardens and the first chill stirs from the high ridge, which piece do you reach for? The smoked hide that remembers rain, or the netted mantle that promises breath? You reach for both, the smoked hide for shade and the netted mantle for breath, and layering becomes your quiet invention. A wrap at dawn, a mantle at noon, a hood at dusk. Clothing is time management stitched to skin. With a bone all you prick a line of holes. With wet sinew you lace edges that draw tight as the thread dries, then relax in rain. Seams appear where folds misbehave. Belts steady simple wraps. Patterns begin as memories in hands. You fold a skin across a knee and notice where movement binds. Next time you cut a notch. Later you add a gusset, a small triangle that frees the stride. Sleeves are experiments in circles, leggings are long pockets for legs. Fur faces out in rain and in against cold. Smoke turns a stiff hide workable. Brains and fat push water from fibers, bark tannins, when river and patience allow, persuade skin to keep shape for seasons. Head and feet teach the hardest lessons. A grass cap spares the crown. Foot wraps begin as folded skins tied with thongs. Grass stuffed inside drinks sweat and keeps skin from slipping. Over years, footwear becomes habit in cold lands. Thin soles doubled, seams turned outward so they do not bruise. Later bones will hint at this change. Toes less burdened by ground, heels cushioned by padding. The footprint of a shoe is also a calendar mark. Distance grows when feet last longer. True stitching arrives with the needle's eye. Somewhere people pierce a sliver of bone, polish the hole, and thread sinew through. The eye carries tension smoothly, lets thread pull without sawing. Tight seams follow, parkas, hoods, mittens that hold warm air like a captured breath. Archaeology will find such needles in caves and frostbound shelters and argue softly about which hands made them first. Neanderthals likely wrapped and pinned. Tailored seams arrive later with people who carried small toolkits. Decoration rides utility. Ochre stripes along hems help you find one another in fog. Beads stitched to a child's cloak tell which family will answer if that child wanders. A strip of contrasting fur sewn at the throat becomes a handle for rescue at river crossings. Meaning clings to edges. Who hunted the deer? Who scraped the hide? Who threaded the needle under dim fire? Clothing asks upkeep. You resoften stiff places by rolling hides around a pole, smoke again after rain, and oil seams so they do not singe. You store bundles high from ants and dogs. Lice arrive and teach you slower grooming. Later, their own family tree will date your habit of wrappers to deep time. Some say tens of millennia, others farther back, an argument nested in tiny bones. When wind sharpens and the plain leans toward cold, the kit travels easily. Hood, cloak, leggings, wraps, cord, all needle thread. But as climates swing harder and seasons slip their old schedules, which matters more, the clever eye of a needle, or the older map in your feet that remembers where warmth gathers? You bring the kit into colder margins where wind saws through grass and the ground rings. Clothing stops being a convenience and becomes a boundary, a movable climate hung from bone. Camp forms in the lee of rock. Smoke braids into cloaks until it smells of safety. You lay skins fur in for sleep, fur out for sleet, and stitch seems tighter than talk. The needle's eye turns hand strength into invisible knots of order. Each pass traps a pocket of warm air, and warmth is time you spend. Work firms into routines. In daylight you scrape hides over smooth stones, chew stiff spots, and rub brains and fat until fibers forget the animal. Evenings you repair. Slip an awl through tired holes, draw wet sinew, and set the piece near the ember so drying shrinks it true. You add hoods that catch breath and mitts that keep fingers blunt. Boots get second soles from soft belly skin. Grass stuffed inside wicks sweat and plumps the fit. Little by little, bodies step farther into weather they once avoided. Plants weave themselves into the system. Inner bark beaten to felt becomes a lining that stays friendly when wet. Plaited grasses become capes that shed rain like a thatch roof in motion. Cordage spins from nettle and flax. Net mantles worn over hides arrest the wind without smothering. Somewhere a loom will be born from sticks and memory, but for now the lesson is simpler. Threads crossed give strength greater than one direction alone. Clothing reshapes other tools. A sling rides ready on a belt. A pouch stitched from scrap keeps embers tinder dry. A strip lashed around a spear haft saves skin. Social signals thicken too. A row of beads at a cuff says who stitched it. A colored band says where a family ranges. A motif on a hood means we share fires. The camp becomes legible by seams. Evidence for all this hides in patient things. Polished awls. Needles drop through floor cracks. Edge-worn scrapers with glossy facets from long hours on hide. Impressions of woven mats pressed into clay by a careless heel. Louse lineages diverging into clothing and head kinds. A molecular footnote to nights spent wrapped. In colder caves, soot lines climb higher where hoods trapped breath and smoke together. The experiment reaches a quiet conclusion you can feel. Distance enlarges, wounds heal warmer, infants cry less in wind. You have built whether that travels. It is modest, stitched from leftovers and patience, yet it changes the map as surely as fire did. In time, hems will lengthen into status, textiles into trade. But here at the beginning, the seam is simply a promise that morning will not steal as much heat. When daylight thins and you pull the hood close, the world narrows to your breath and the muffled drum of your feet. Layers teach patience and foresight. Is clothing only a barrier or also a memory? An archive of hands, animals, and seasons carried forward against the cold. Story 8, Footprints in Ash. Litali's morning and what feet remember. You wake into a sky the color of wet pottery. During the night, a distant cone coughed, and ash fell like sifted flour across the plain. Morning adds a dew layer. The surface cakes, then softens under each step, making a shallow bed for memory. You walk because there is nothing else to do. You walk because fruit hides in the broken acacias beyond the low ridge. Every footfall writes a sentence you never meant to compose. Heel first as always. The print begins with a rounded stamp, then rolls forward along the outer edge. The big toe presses last, tucked toward the line of travel rather than grasping to the side. It leaves a bulb where weight pushes off. In the shallow midfoot, ash shears into a crescent. An arch lives there, not the high, taut bridge of later runners, but enough to spring the step. Your stride is small, steady, neither hurried nor afraid for now. Behind you, a second set follows, a little shorter, spacing regular. You share the ash with others. Guinea fowls stitch dots and commas. In the distance, three-toed prints from grazing antelope press deep, dew pooling in each basin. There is the rounded splay of a rhinoceros that crossed before dawn, and the soft drag of a lizard's tail that writes a wavering line between splayed toes. The plain is a notebook today, everyone writing with weight and water. You pause where the ash lies thicker. A faint circular scuff shows where you rotated on the ball of the foot to look left, perhaps at a hyena path, perhaps at nothing. The second walker steps into the edge of your print and deforms it slightly, toe pushing a fresh lip of ash over your heel. This is not carelessness. It is the small choreography of moving together through a morning. For a few steps you overlap, then separate again as the ground firms. The air smells faintly of sulfur and damp grass. Ash dust settles on hair and lashes and gives every surface a chalky calm. Underneath, the soil is young and warm. Heat rises as if the earth were someone breathing. You notice how the ash preserves truths your eyes usually miss. The way toes splay more when the ground tilts. The way the heel digs deeper when hands carry weight. The way a brief hesitation widens the stance. These are ordinary facts, but in ash they feel like instruction. Later ages will call this place Litali and measure your gait with twine and calipers, arguing about arches, toe angles, and how close your walk sits to ours. Today it is only the path to fruit and water. The prints lead toward a clutch of trees where birds are already restless. When the sun lifts higher, wind will ruffle the sentences, then seal them into stone so future hands can trace your morning. Do you turn back to read what you have written, or keep walking and let the day write the rest by itself? You reach the acacias and any thought of prints falls away to simple work. Fruit hangs low where branches sag under ash, dulling color but not sweetness. Fingers blacken. You wipe them on your thigh and move on, leaving a string of darker ovals where ash rubbed to paste. The ground beneath the trees records other truths. Heels dig deeper as you bend to reach. Toes splay wider where you brace against roots. Once the smaller walker steps into the center of your last heel, making a composite, two gates together, one decision shared. Wind lifts after midday and ruffles the surface into small waves. A brief shower follows, not enough to scour, only to soften. Ash turns to thin slurry, takes sharper impressions, then skins over as sun returns. Your trackway becomes a sequence of microvents: press, slump, ripple, crust. A guinea fowl prints across while the film is still wet, and the crater of a raindrop stipples the margin. When the surface hardens, it locks your morning to the plain like a pressed leaf. Below, other layers wait. Yesterday's ash lies dull and compacted. Last week's is already paler and more grainy. Moisture will creep downward and glue these beds grain by grain, turning fluff into stone light to break in a hand yet tough to survive seasons. Roots will stitch it. An elephant that strays here next month will crack the crust but spare the buried text. Years will add dust and grass. Another ash fall will lay a clean page over all of it. People far ahead will read the pages. They will measure stride and estimate hip height from the gap between steps. They will note the inward pointing big toe, the lack of claw marks, the roll from heel to toe that speaks of a foot like yours, arched enough to spring, toes aligned for push rather than grip. They will argue politely about numbers, less politely about meanings. Were you carrying a bundle when the heels sink deeper? Did a child ride a hip where the small track vanishes for 10 steps? The rest of the plain continues as if nothing lasting happened. A rhinoceros scribbles its heavy script and is gone. A lizard writes a line, erases it with a start, then writes again. A beetle tunnels under the crust, lifting a blister. You cross a damp patch and your toes dig harder. You cross a slope and your stance widens. Each adjustment is unremarkable and because of that, diagnostic. The ash is not a shrine. It is a ledger that happens to be legible. By late light, the wind returns and moves the topmost veil. Your morning dims under a flowery haze, already half forgotten. You glance back once, more from habit than sentiment. The smaller walker has moved ahead now, choosing firmer ground. Tomorrow the surface will look ordinary unless someone looks closely. If another fall comes tonight, will your sentences be erased clean or sealed perfectly for a reader you will never meet? Afternoon builds a low storm that never quite arrives. Thunder patrols the ridge. Sprinkles gloss the ash and seal its skin. You and the smaller walker take the long arc home, following thorn islands where wind trims the surface smooth. For a few strides you step into the other's print, more for comfort than need. Other lives cross the page while it is still wet. A hyena sets 4 blunt ovals beside your path, pads crisp, claws faint. A bird lands and skids, wings scratching a pale script. A millipede draws a zipper. Nothing intends to be kept. The mountain keeps it, laying powder over errands. Beneath the crust, the process turns slow. Capillary water creeps up at night and down by noon, gluing grains. In months the surface darkens, then is buried by dust, then by another ash fall that lays a blank. What you left becomes light rock, friable to fingers, stubborn to time. The overlapping step shifts from accident to chapter. Far ahead, readers kneel with brushes and patience. They trace the heel-first roll, the lateral path of weight, the push of the big toe pointing forward. They diagram the arch low, present, and compare spacing to bodies they know. Some see 2, others a third lighter, stepping into prints and making composites that complicate certainty. Debates bloom. Was a load carried where the heel bites deeper, or was the ground simply wetter? The answers resist certainty, yet ordinary facts hold. Upright bodies with feet built to travel left a line toward trees after ash. Their steps were close enough to share space and far enough to keep sight. The gait was not a scramble or a climb, but a pedestrian persistence that would, in other weathers and epochs, carry tools, embers, infants, stories. You do not know you have become legible. You drop pits in shade, rinse hands in a pan from the shower, and cross your own trackway without ceremony. Evening tilts the light and turns the ash to pewter. The smaller walker runs ahead and waits at the next thorn island, and you follow, heel to toe, heel to toe. City streets now carry a similar grammar. Rubber soles polishing stone at corners, crosswalk paint abraded where crowds hesitate, sand on foyer tile scuffed into crescents by a night shift's quiet traffic. Our devices count steps the way ash once did, converting motion into numbers while the ground adds its own pale memory. Even shoes remember, creasing where arches load and toes push, where maps echo the ash, ordinary miles turning quietly into evidence. When paths are paved and footprints invisible, what part of us still listens for the ledger underfoot, asking where we came from and how far we have yet to go? Story 9. Winter bodies, Neanderthal heat budgets and wood piles. You wake in a shallow rock shelter where wind combs the valley but does not find you. Frost nets the grass. The hearth holds a red eye under gray. Last night's coals survived hours when breath hung like thread. You stir them with a split stick, feed slivers first, then thicker lengths, thinking ahead. How much heat you can afford, how much wood the day can replace. On this cold morning. Your body is built for this arithmetic. Short forearms and shins reduce surface. A broad ribcage moves slow, heavy air. Nose passages warm and moisten breath before it meets lungs that know cold. The shape is not a boast, only a budget. Heat you keep is food you do not have to hunt. You wear hides that smell of smoke and marrow wrapped, pinned, not stitched fine, fur turned as the weather demands. Grease rubbed into skin keeps wet from winning. Snow fills prints down the slope. The river crawls under ice. Morning work begins with fuel. You do not carry big logs, you carry knowledge of wood. Birch lights quickly but burns fast. Pine smokes. Oak, if you have it, keeps a bed of coal. Dead standing limbs matter more than fallen ones. You knock them loose with a hafted scraper, twist and test, stacked by thickness near but not at the hearth. Children learn the measure of an armful, how it translates into an hour. Tools answer winter's terms. A prepared core flake shears clean from its nucleus. A side scraper sings against hide to soften it. A stout point shoulders into a wooden shaft with birch pitch. Everything is thickened against cold. Handles wrapped with sinew. Tips warmed before use so stone doesn't crack at first bite. You set a slab behind the fire to reflect heat and dry damp cloaks. You bank coals to one side to make a warm bench for hands. Food bends toward fat. Reindeer legs promise marrow. Ribs become rafters over coals. A strip of meat dries slowly in smoke that keeps flies asleep this season. Plants are not gone, only quiet. Inner bark scraped thin, cached bulbs from fall, seeds toasted at the rim for a taste that lives under snow. Teeth tell the mix, microware that remembers both tendon and grit, calculus that hides starches cooked to stop the sting. Camp is a diagram of warmth. Sleeping hollows ride the lee. The ember sits where draft feeds fire without stealing it. The entrance faces morning light, not the prevailing wind. A warmed stone set near a skin bag loosens ice, and snow melted in a bark bowl at the fire's skirt becomes a cup. Ash is swept outward to keep pests and sparks in their lanes. Every gesture conserves heat or prevents waste. Cloud builds over the ridge by mid-morning, a flat lid. Wood stacks look smaller under that sky. Do you hunt now while light is honest, or stay and double the pile against a storm that could make tomorrow shorter than your fuel? You choose to hunt before the sky closes. 2 stay to grow the pile and mine the coals. 4 take spears and a coil of sinew. Snow reports everything. The overnight drift inside reindeer slots, the splay where a doe turned, the shallow belly print where a calf rose slow. Wind is in your face. Scent walks away toward the herd. You pace yourself to the cold, breathing through nose and scarfed fur so lungs don't spark pain. Hunting is planning made visible. You angle upslope to where drifts trap legs and sound dies quietly. Spears are stout and short for thrusting, their points shouldered to bite and then withdraw. Birch pitch glints black at bindings, hide lashings shrink hard in the cold. A watcher circles wide to read the herd while you tuck into a swale. When the line tightens, you show yourself only at the last moment, pushing animals toward the soft, deep snow chosen hours ago. Clamor is brief. A stag plows, then stumbles suddenly. Snow becomes a net. Two step in, keep low, and drive points into the chest where bone gives resistance. Breath turns white ropes, hooves scissor. When weight stops struggling, silence returns with clarity, the odd stillness good hunts leave. Field work is warmth by other means. You open along the brisket with a flake warmed at breath, peel hide back and free fat first. Suet lifts like pale stone and goes to a rawhide bag. Marrow and brain are next. Meat follows, but you favor dense cuts, leaving sinew and long bones for later if light fails. Ribs stack as sleds, cords draw bundles like boats. Back at shelter, fuel becomes meat's partner. Birch bark wakes the hearth, thin pine branches bridge to denser wood. A stone set upright throws heat back, another warms water snowed in a bowl. Hides steam, then relax patiently. Children crush ice to slush and pass it to elders to melt, saving fuel. Ash is banked thick to keep coals drowsy during storms that steal air. Shelter deepens. Hides are stretched on stakes as a windbreak. Snow is piled to make a wall that insulates better than stone. A smoke hole stays open with a forked stick, otherwise eyes burn and sleep shortens. Tools warm at the rim so stone does not snap at first bite. Someone drips a pinch of black powder, manganese scraped from a seam onto tinder. Sometimes it coaxes damp wood to catch faster. Food is also medicine. Broth softens tendon, warms hands from within, and releases marrow's quiet heat. A thin stew of bulbs softened in bone broth rides the evening. Fat glistens in circles. Shares are even. A blinking watcher makes mistakes. Clouds lower until the valley becomes a single color. You could push for a second kill while tracks are fresh, or stay to double wood against a hard wind that may erase paths and test the roof tonight. Which budget do you balance today? Calories you might catch, or heat you can bank? You stay to bank heat. The sky lowers to a single sheet. Wind combs the ridge and flattens breath. The shelter shrinks to the radius of firelight, the problem of wood. Fuel is a second stomach tonight. You sort sticks by thickness, set quick stuff aside to wake the heart, and lay denser lengths like ribs around a core that glows. Snow writes a wall for you. You pack it with flat stones and frozen hides until the lee becomes a room. Smoke is counseled up and out with a forked pole. Someone trims a vent low so new air crawls to the coals before frost can bite lungs. The floor is lined with grass and bark. Sleeping hollows are edged with warmed rocks that give back heat. A skin bag of snow melts at the rim and becomes broth. Heat moves like a chore you assign to objects. Tools find their winter uses. A thick-backed knife worries frozen sinew without shattering. A scraper smooths stiff hide until it sighs. Points are checked, bindings tighten, pitch reheated. Meat steams, then settles near the ember. Bones crack clean under blankets. Marrow thickens the broth and quiets the hands. Children string beads through board shells onto fringe. Elders show how to mend a seam by feel alone. Night tests the plan. Wind climbs and plucks at seams. A gust suctions smoke back and eyes flood. You lower the fire, pull coals forward, and feed outer wood slowly so flames do not speak above the shelter's lip. Ash is managed like snow, banked, shaped, used to mute orange. A watcher rubs manganese and fat into a crumb of punk and the coal wakes, insurance against a heart gone black. The pale moon lifts behind the clouded ridge, unnoticed. Dawn comes thinner, but you have kept the embers line unbroken. The pile is halved, the hides are drier, the camp smarter. You carry fat folded in skin and a memory of where standing wood slept under drifts. The hunt resumes, but on your schedule, not the storm. Last night's footprints have softened. The herd moved where you predicted the wind would quiet. You follow with short, warm breaths and hands that don't fumble. Later ages will handle your charcoal, your pot lid spalls, your windbreak's footprint and tell a story of budgets, not heroics. They will read bodies compacted for cold, toolkits with stout scrapers, hearths refreshed in layers, and say endurance is a culture. The lesson endures into our rooms of central heat and cordwood, our timers, our lists. Check seals, bank coals, portion fuel, share. As valleys fill with snow and smoke thins to pale, you shoulder a bundle of wood and step into the clean cold. The shelter sighs behind you, warmer than night, poorer by a few sticks, richer by a method. In a future of radiators and thermostats, do we still live by this ledger? Heat for time, time for miles, miles for meat, and ask what we save our warmth for. Story 10. Tides and Middens, Coasts as Larders for Early Sapiens. You wake to a breath that smells of salt and wet stone. The sea has turned during the night, laying an edge of weed and shells below the dune. Tides are your clock. You watch the moon's shoulder set, note the band of damp sand it left, and measure time until the next window when rocks expose their larders. Breakfast depends on distance between water and shore, and on how well you can read it. You go early with baskets and a digging stick of fire-hardened wood. Bare feet learn slickness, testing footholds before weight commits. You start high in the splash zone where limpets grip like clenched fists and periwinkles pepper the stone. A twist and a lift free them. The taste is simple, the yield dependable. Lower down, mussels tile the rocks in blue-black bands. You pry a fringe, slide a wedge of bone beneath, and ease clusters into the basket. The sea answers with pulses that test balance and tug at your load. You learn species as biography. Small brown chitons hide under ledges and concede only to patience. Abalone demand a surprise blow and a quick knife. Rock pools hold crabs that back into crevices and anemones that look like flowers until touched. Seaweeds tell seasons, tender blades after storms, thick fronds in warm months. You take what regrows quickly and leave seed beds. Emptying a patch punishes tomorrow. Tools are simple and honest. A hammerstone splits urchins. A bone wedge spares fingers. A reed basket drains while you walk. Sometimes you build with the tide. A half-moon of stones that slows retreating water and persuades small fish to linger. At very low water, you pin a woven fence into sand so the returning tide presses bait through it, leaving silver commas in the mesh. Fires wait above the rack line. You steam shellfish under wet kelp, the fronds hissing and scenting meat. Seaweed dries on driftwood racks, turning dark, salty, and sweet. Coasts feed steadily when inland thins. Fat and iodine enter bodies, infants sleep heavier. Cuts sting less in brine, but the margin is not tame. Rogue waves erase baskets, barnacles slice, and cold bites fingers until clumsiness taxes courage. You plan the day with humility, always an exit, always a glance behind. Evidence of your mornings accumulates in quiet mounds. Shells pile where wind is kind, a pale crescent against dune or rock. Ash darkens layers, fish bones lace through. Ochre stains appear where hides were mended and gums mixed with glue. Years compress this into middens, a ledger of meals and weather. Later, people will open them and count tides by growth rings, red seasons in species, and find heat-cracked shells that whisper cooking rather than sun. The moon lifts again, promising a lower low tonight. Baskets are heavy, hands salted, fire steady. Do you return for a last sweep along the exposed ledges, or climb the dune and begin the patient work of cleaning, smoking, and saving the sea's small, regular gifts? You climb the dune because work begins when baskets are full. Above the rack line, wind thins the smell, flies leave. You sort by speed. Mussels to steam now, periwinkles to dry, urchins to crack for fat, seaweed to rinse and hang. A hearth of rounded stones holds steady heat. Kelp fronds become lids that drip brine. The hiss is a timetable. When the steam slackens, shells open and yield quietly. Preservation builds distance into food. You thread mussels on twigs and smoke them near, not over, the coals. You split limpets and set them on rock to leather in wind. You shred seaweed and weave it across driftwood frames. Salt is your ally and your problem. Too much and meat hardens to stones, too little and the night undoes your day. You learn a pinch method, 2 fingerfuls per bundle, and trust your tongue more than any measure. Tools change flavor. A stone anvil rounds the bitterness from sea nuts. A bone pin slides into crab joints. A scraper, first made for hides, pares fish thin for drying and smoking. Children grind shells to powder, mix with water and a little ash to rub on teeth and keep grit from winning. You smear a ribbon of kelp fat across a cut. Sting says it works. The tide writes schedules you follow. Spring tides after new moon pull water low enough to expose caves of abalone. Neeps barely uncover ankle-deep water, and you settle for periwinkles, greens, and traps set earlier. Traps are patience shaped into stone and reed. A crescent wall that the ebb leaves dry. A wicker gate narrow enough that fish hesitate to leave. You check them at the last moment, hip deep and cold, then step away as the ocean turns. Shorelines offer economies. Fresh water seeps at sand's base. You dig a palm-deep bowl and let clear slowly collect. Driftwood brings lands not seen, logs that burn slow, resinous sticks that spark, knots that resist blades and become mallets. Birds arrive in tides too. After storms, exhausted shearwaters can be gathered. Eggs, taken sparingly, answer lean days. You learn limits, then add stories to remember them. Leave brood ledges, spare first clutches, answer the sea with restraint. Middens rise like pale dunes behind camp. Layer by layer they record arguments you no longer hear. Seasons when mussels dominated. Years when urchins grew small from greed. Months when fish bones spike because a river ran briefly clean. Ash seems mark nights of talk and mending. Someone will read them one day and know your moon habits better than your names. Evening draws a crosswind, the last basket cools. You face a choice the coast never stops asking. The tide will fall at midnight, the lowest of the month. Abalone, trapped fish, new driftwood, all likely if you walk again. But night waves forget your steps. Do you sleep and guard the day's gains, or follow the moon into black water for a harvest that might lengthen tomorrow and the next day? You choose the moon. The dune sand holds your heat for a moment, then gives it back to night. Below, the ebb exposes ribs of rock like a large animal breathing. You carry a coal in a limpet shell cushioned with damp kelp, the glow hidden from wind. The ocean's noise is slower at this tide. Long inhalations, long sighs, leaving pools that mirror stars. Night changes the menu and the manners. Crabs grow bolder, fish sleep along ledges, their gills answering the clock you can't see but trust. You step with rule and ritual. Never turn your back to the black line, keep one hand on stone, test every glossy patch with the stick before committing weight. A cold tongue of water licks the ankles and retreats, measuring you in its own units. Work is quiet. You slide a bone wedge under muscle lips that stayed shut in the day and open now with less persuasion. You cup urchins from their beds and crack 2 for fat that smells of iron and salt. In a deep pool, a school of small fish jitters like spilled beads. You lower a netted scoop, lift, and listen to their soft arithmetic against cordage. Kelp fronds steam gently above the rack line, lids that whisper when done. Farther along, the crescent of stones you set at neap has collected silver in its arc. You ease 2 out and leave the rest to seed. Moonlight draws company. A seal's head rises beyond the bar, round and unreadable. It watches, breathes, and sinks. Shore birds work the line ahead, stabbing at sand fleas that pop like sparks. Far out, a low pulse of white shows where a breaker spins itself. The delay before its sound tells you how far the edge has moved. You keep the coal alive with breaths you measure between waves. By the time the tide turns, the baskets are truthful rather than greedy, enough to stretch days, not so much that you stumble. You climb when the first returning fingers of water find the soles. On the dune, wind braids your hair with salt. You bank the coal. The night keeps its blue. Below, the ocean erases your footprints with a soft hand, then forgets you. Years will translate this routine into pale hills of shell and bone. Layers will show storms by sudden drifts of one species, droughts by thin years, feasts by thick chalky lines. In the Matrix, fish ear bones will carry season as rings. In Soot, someone will read which woods drifted to your shore. They will say the coast kept you through lean interiors, offered iodine to thinking bodies, fat to distance, salt to nerve. You already know it as steady sleep and calm mouths. You lie back on the sand and listen to the sea think. The moon lowers like a patient lid. Phosphorescence writes brief sentences where the last swash fades. Breath settles with the surf's metronome. For a long moment it feels as if the whole shore is an animal and you are only the quiet inside its ribs, waiting for the next slow tide to turn.